Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Corbett. I'm a volunteer here at Design for Drupal, along with Leslie Glynn, who will cover announcements in just a moment. This is the 14th annual Design for Drupal. For those of you who are new to d4d, this is an annual event devoted to Drupal design, UX, front-end development, as well as the business and process challenges facing Drupal teams. We are typically in person, held once a year in Boston, Massachusetts. But as we have been in the pandemic phase, we have been doing monthly webinars on various Drupal design and front-end topics. We do, however, anticipate holding next year's event in person, and we're going to keep you updated on those plans as they come together. We're supported by a great team of volunteers here, including Catherine Carruthers handling our video recording today, and Catherine Waldron, who manages our social media and newsletter and mailings. And I'm going to turn things over to Leslie Glynn for some announcements. Leslie?
Thank you, Patrick. And welcome everybody to our December webinar for Design for Drupal Boston. I have a bit.ly link at the bottom of the screen here. It's D, the number 4, D for Design for Drupal, and then it's December DEC22 if you're interested in getting the slides. Today we're going to welcome Vaughn from the Drupal Association. Patrick will be introducing Vaughn in a minute. The topic for today is how to create and maintain healthy communities, the importance of psychological safety. Just for those of you who may be new to Design for Drupal, we did have a webinar last June with Sharon Steed. The keynote was on developing sustainable empathy systems. It was a really good keynote. There is a recording. If you go to the website, designfordrupal.org, you can click on the link to see the recording. A big part of Design for Drupal is contributing back to the community. There are Slack channels on the drupalslack.com for the different front-end themes which are now included in Drupal 10 and the project browser and other initiatives as well. So everybody's welcome to join. There's contribution opportunities for everybody, all interests, all Drupal knowledge levels, and even if you don't even know Drupal, there are plenty of opportunities to help test things out and let us know how things are going. Mentors are available for contributing, so just reach out. Our upcoming webinar series, January 18th, we're going to have Randy Ost from 4 Kitchens talking about front-end and Figma Magic, building a connected UI kit for Emulsify. On February 15th, we have Melissa Miller from Pantheon, who's going to talk about how to hack Storybook for Drupal. So we'd like folks to join those as well. There's a lot of great information that you can get from these different monthly webinars. As I said, or I inferred, Drupal 10 was released last week, which is really exciting. Some of the things that the folks who typically are the Design for Drupal audience would be interested in are CK Editor 5. It makes content creation, best of breed, much easier. So that is in Drupal 10. The new Claro admin theme, Christina Tremelis gave a keynote last year on the Claro, so that is included now in Drupal 10. And Mike Herschel has given a webinar on the new Olivero front-end theme. So that's Drupal's out-of-the-box experience. Instead of the old Bartik theme, there's a new out-of-the-box Olivero theme. And then there's a new theme generator tool, which allows you to easily create custom themes. I hope to bring on folks to talk about all of these different Drupal 10, and there's a lot more than this, but anything of interest to our Design for Drupal community, we'll try to either have webinars or we'll have them come to the in-person event and present sessions on these things. Oops. Community events, DrupalCon North America is happening June 5th to 8th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's a link there, events.drupal.org/Pittsburgh 2023. The sessions will be announced, I believe, in February, and the hotels and all that will be announced soon as well. And Vaughn is a big part of all this logistics behind this for the Drupal Association. So it's great that we have Vaughn on our webinar today. In October 17th to 20th, there's DrupalCon Lille, which is in France. That's an international DrupalCon. A lot of North America folks go as well. So that is something you can look into. And then more locally, these are US based, but there's a lot more camps as well. February 17th, 18th is the next one, Florida Drupal Camp. That's in person. March 16th to 18th, Drupal Camp New Jersey, also in person. March 17th to 19th is Nerd Summit. If you're in the Boston area, that's at UMass Amherst. That's in person as well. That is more of an open source, but it does include many sessions on Drupal. April 26th to 28th is MidCamp. They're going to try both online and in person. And then Stanford out in California is online virtual on May 11th to 12th. On the December 14th, there was a Drupal 10 launch party. That happened. That was really good. A lot of great information was shared there. On the Drupal.org/community events page, you can see all of the upcoming camps, including international, upcoming local meetups, contribution events, all kinds of things. So go to, check back frequently on the community/events page on Drupal.org. The code of conduct is being followed today on this webinar and all of our webinars and in-person events. So there's a link to it in the footer of the website. Give Patrick or myself a call if there's any questions, but just basically treat everybody with dignity and respect, and let us know if anything comes up. Our 15th anniversary, as Patrick said, is coming up. We're looking at probably an early August timeframe for that in-person event. We're still working with venues to try to get, figure out where we're going to hold the event. It'll be in the Boston area though. We do need sponsors. We need, event coordinators, social media, marketing help, additional help there. So if you want to reach out to Boston at designfordrupal.org to help us with that event, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you to our gold digital sponsor, Redfin Solutions. And thank you to our digital sponsors, EPAM, DevCollab, Atten, Elevated Third, Canopy Studios, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Pantheon. So thank you. Sponsors are what allow us to have the tools to be able to run these webinars, and for the in-person event, we'll be reaching out for additional sponsors as well. Spread the word on today's event on social media. Hashtag D4d Boston. And Q&A will be held at the end, so put your questions in the chat, and Patrick will read those off to Vaughn after the presentation. So take it away, Patrick. He'll be introducing Vaughn today.
Great, thanks, Leslie. Today's speaker is Vaughn Eaton. Vaughn is the Director of Programs at the Drupal Association, but is also an activist, community engagement professional, and a change maker. Vaughn holds degrees in political science with a focus on grassroots organizing, European minor in international education, and his master's in sociology from the University of North Carolina. Vaughn also consults under his own company, Wasp and Fig, where he focuses on anti-oppression education. Vaughn is passionate about building the tools and processes that people need in order to affect real change in their work and lives. And today we're very excited to have him here to talk to us today about the importance of psychological safety in our communities. Welcome to Design for Drupal, Vaughn. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here. And if folks could just give me a little indicator in the chat that you can see my screen, that would be awesome. But
That's good.
Great, awesome. So like Patrick said, my name is Vaughn. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Director of Programs for the Drupal Association. If you would like a copy of these slides, you can scan the QR code or type in the URL. If you don't have a QR code functionality, and I just put that in the chat for you all. And so some of you may have seen this before. I presented this at Ally Talks and also at NedCamp, but the really cool thing about this workshop is that it's different depending on who's in the room, because we are all having a unique experience when it comes to psychological safety. So I'm going to jump right in. And I am going to go over these roles pretty quickly, because they're kind of similar to the Drupal code of conduct, like Leslie mentioned earlier, but our roles together in this space is to manage our discomfort and take risks, have respect and accountability for ourselves and for each other, and to center progress and patience, and not perfection. So this is a learning space, and then self and community care. So taking the space that you need to be able to receive the information, and also ensuring that we're caring for one another's needs at the same time. And my role as a facilitator is to share resources and foundational knowledge, provide some tangible strategies and best practices, and support you in your learning. So one thing we're going to get into in a little bit later in the presentation is I am not a keeper of all knowledge. I don't use the word expert when talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, or anti-oppression. I use the word practitioner because it's a practice, and none of us are ever experts because it's always changing, and we always want to be making sure that we leave space for our continued learning. So those are our roles today. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to get into what's a virtual community. What are the key elements of psychological safety? What are some of the barriers to healthy communities, and what strategies can we use to maintain them? So those kind of are our 4 key guiding points today. So I use a presentation tool called Mentimeter. And so if you don't mind, this is a different QR code. So the first QR code is for the Google Slides. This QR code is to be able to interact with the presentation. So again, you can scan that, or you can go to www.menti.com, MENTI, and you can enter the code, which is 35643379. And so if you all will just give me a little heart emoji, let me know that you're in there. That would be awesome. We have 5. We have, excuse me, we have 8. All right, let's see, how many do we have left here? 9. Give people a couple more seconds to jump into Mentimeter and let me know that you're there. All right, is anyone having trouble getting into Mentimeter? I'll take a perfectly timed sip of my coffee while I wait.
Yeah, if people don't know, you can use your smartphone's camera, usually anyway. I think these days it's pretty straightforward, just to hold your camera up, and before you hit the button to take a photo, it should come up with a link you can click.
Absolutely. All right. So I put I saw a little gold one come through. That was cool. And I also have the link and the code in the chat for you if you need to come back to it. All right, so let's get started. So to get our brains moving, your screen, whatever screen you're using, should have moved to this question portion. So if you could just tell me in 1 to 2 words, describe how you're feeling coming into this conversation. Curious and intrigued, those are great words. Right, unsure and confused is also good. Awesome. So lots of different perspectives coming through, lots of different starting places, and that is a positive and healthy thing. But as you can all see, this beautiful word cloud, most people are feeling curious, which is great. Curiosity is an awesome starting point because that means that we're, able to have open conversations and consume new information, which is awesome. And I hope that those of you all who are feeling unsure or confused, when we do this exercise again at the end, I hope that you will feel more confident and secure in the information. I love the nostalgic answer. Maybe that's someone that has seen this presentation before, so I love that. All right, engaged, hopeful, wonderful, interested, awesome, cool. So let's move on just for the sake of time. So before I tell you what a community is, I would love for you to tell me what a community is to you. So what are some things that in your perspective makes up a community. And this doesn't have to just be Drupal. And we're talking about virtual communities today specifically, but this can be any community that you're a part of. So what are like the core elements of a community for you? The people. Absolutely. There is no community without each other, right? Coming together, shared goals. Yeah, lots of centering of human beings, which is essential. Many people talking about shared goals, values, interests, diversity, inclusion, and safety to be who you are. Absolutely. System, location, or identity. Yeah, that one definitely saw my presentation before. People with something in common. Absolutely. Give one or two people a chance to respond if they would like to. I like that one. People who choose to work, learn, and grow together. Yeah, so I love that idea of choice. People who care and are encouraging. Absolutely. Awesome. And feel free to, if you want the answer. So I don't, when I do these presentations, I don't share the results so that you all feel confident to share them. And I know they'll be captured in the recording, but if you want to take a screenshot of the results, you certainly can. But we can also always come back to the recording later on. People, support, and education. Awesome. All right. So what is a community? So in sociology, there is no singular definition of community. Like you can't like open a textbook and say that's what it is. That we have what's called sociology of community, which is really grounded in social theory. So many theorists have created working definitions, and the one that I use is a group who follows a social structure. So someone talked about systems on the last page, housed within a society. So, we can't be divorced from the overarching incubator that we all live in. Bound by a sense of belonging sustained across time and space. So today we're going to be talking about virtual communities specifically, but these principles can be extended into your local communities as well, and your in-person groups. So one more time, a group who follows a social structure within a society bound by a sense of belonging sustained across time and space. So it's that idea of social bonds, of structure, of transcendence. So this is the working definition of community that I lean into when I do these presentations. All right, so communities can also be classified based on their purpose that brings them together. And a lot of these you all already mentioned in that first activity that we just did. So they can be brought together by interest. So communities of people who share common passion. A lot of you already said that. Action. Communities of people trying to bring about some kind of change. That's that like grassroots organizing. It could be your local nonprofits. It could be your church group. Any group of people that are committed to affecting change. Communities can simply be brought together by place. So mere coincidence of a common geographical location, right? So I think about high school is a great example. Like you're in high school with people and you're all at that high school because you live in the district that high school's housed in, right? And that is a community. So practice, communities of people who have the same profession or undertake the same activities. So Drupal is a great example. Open source broadly is a great example, but also like maybe your local pickleball league, right? And then circumstance. So communities of people brought together by external events or situations. So this could be retreats. This could be like big national events, like this could be your local pride parade, anything like that. So communities can form in these specific purpose-driven ways, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? So a community could be all of these things potentially. So virtual communities are all of these really could be all of these really except for place, because we're talking about geographical location. Now, of course, we have regional Drupal Slack channels, right? And you have like virtual meetups and hangouts for different places in the world. And so there can definitely be a geographical component to virtual communities, but you're not required to be in the same geographical place in order to interact with someone virtually, right? That's the beautiful and powerful thing about being online, is that you could talk to anyone from anywhere. So we're really going to be focusing on these other 4 purpose-driven forms of community. So interest, action, practice, and circumstance. All right. So what are the key elements of psychological safety? Now that we know what we're talking about when we talk about community, what are we talking about around psychological safety? So navigating power and oppression. So this is like the #1 key element of psychological safety. We oftentimes find in good faith attempts of like diversity, equity, and inclusion, of trying to ignore power and oppression, like we're all equal here, right? But those systems are always, always present, even in our individual interactions. So we have to be able to navigate power and oppression at the individual and systemic level. And by systemic, it means like macro level, societal, economic, all of those kinds of things. So we have to be able to acknowledge power dynamics first and foremost. And how do we do that? We do that through building trust and vulnerability. So we can't really practice psychological safety if we don't trust each other to do that. And we have to build that trust through consensual vulnerability, right? So the consent piece is next, which is agency. So personal agency, consenting to the process, creating good systems that allow people to consent and opt into those trust and vulnerability exercises, supporting and nurturing each other through these processes. So building those networks of support within a community, finding safe people, and nurturing the ecosystem that develops psychological safety. So this isn't necessarily a one-to-one nurturing of each other on an individual level, but nurturing the shared vision and goal. Transparency is a huge one in building psychological safety. So clear and open communication, like circling the wagons type of feedback loops, being very clear with our intentions, giving the why, and then building tools of loving accountability. So not carceral. And we're going to get into what I mean by carceral in a little bit, but building systems of accountability that allow people to grow and change behavior. But in order to get to accountability, we have to build the other things first, right? Because accountability is very vulnerable. And so if we don't have trust and agency and support and transparency and an acknowledgement of power dynamics, then we can't have healthy accountability. So those are the key elements that we're going to go through today. So I'm going to give you all a minute. So true or false, individual and systemic power dynamics function independently from each other in life. What do folks think? And don't let the poll mob sway your opinion. Give your real answer. It's totally anonymous. All right. And I believe you all have the functionality to message me privately in the Zoom chat, I'm pretty sure. Is that true, Patrick?
I believe so. I can.
Cool.
Could somebody just confirm that for me in the chat? Chat says disabled. Yeah, it looks like it's disabled.
Oh, chat is turned off. Okay. No worries.
Yeah, chat, and yes.
That's totally fine.
They can use the question option though, if you'd like them to respond there.
Awesome.
The Q&A. Yep.
So if you feel comfortable, you don't have to. I would love for one person, anonymous or not, from the true camp to tell me why you said true, and one person from the false camp to tell me why you said false. And I can see the Q&A, and I believe the Q&A allows you to anonymize. And so I just want to hear your thoughts if you would like. And then once I get those answers, we'll talk through what the answer is. And if folks don't want to, that's okay too. No pressure. Awesome. Yeah, so I'm going to click the answer live button. So the false camp, right? So someone from false said you simply can't be something you're not. You're never operating in an individual dynamic and not, for example, also being a Black woman. Right, exactly. And then someone from the true camp said just guessing, which is also an extremely amazing and valid answer. And I love the bravery of guessing and trying, because we're building psychological safety right here, right now, which is amazing. Cool. So those of you that said false, you are correct. So, and the person who submitted in the anonymous Q&A said it almost perfectly. We can't be something that we're not, right? And so no matter what environment you're in, no matter how psychologically safe it is, these power dynamics are always present. And this is true in every country, every continent, every community, because these power dynamics are global. So I can never go into a space not having all of the identities that I hold that affect the way that I move through the world. And I bring that with every interaction, right? And so do we all, which is why we have to acknowledge them. So we can't go into a space and say, this is a brave space for everyone, everyone's welcome here. But then if everyone in that space holds the same identity, then someone who doesn't share that identity will have a more difficult time entering that space, right? So thank you all for participating in that question with me. All right, so let's get into some barriers. This is what we just started talking about. So systemic power dynamics is really one of the largest barriers to creating healthy communities, but they're not impossible to overcome. It just takes collective action. So just takes collective action. So those folks of marginalized identity are held to different standards than those of privileged identity. And I want to take a moment to define privileged. So privileged does not mean that your life is easy and that you get everything that you ever wanted for in life. That's not what privileged means in this context. So privileged means that when we're talking about power dynamics specifically, your identities do not impact your ability to access resources, your ability to have professional success, your ability to have your voice heard. And the struggles that you do have in your life are not a result of your identity. So that's what we're saying when we're talking about privileged identity. And so systemic power dynamics show up in a lot of different ways, and it's super nuanced, right? It's not super cut and dry. So, if a good example that I like to highlight is a teacher who is queer is able to get fired by a straight student accusing them of misconduct at school, right? And so that's a complicated power dynamic, right? Because in theory, the teacher has power over the student, but that systemic power dynamic does exist. And we have seen that happen in different countries all over the world. So that's just like an example of a nuanced power dynamic that's rooted in like systemic homophobia, right? So what does that mean for perceived severity in virtual communities? So there is a lot of research on this around human psychology and the power of the anonymous keyboard. And so there's a perceived lack of severity when harm is enacted in digital spaces, even when it's not anonymous, right? So that makes it really challenging to practice radical accountability. A lot of times you see this mostly on social media, but even in Slack communities that are seemingly more insular, a lot of folks are much more willing to say things virtually than they would ever say in person to someone's face, right? And that is because of the distance that's created through virtual platforms. Now, I don't want to send the message that virtual communities are inherently harmful, because they're not, right? It just means that we have to be more intentional about how we communicate with each other. And, it's also more challenging to practice radical accountability online because someone can just simply not respond to your message or delete their tweet or block you right? So, and folks can do that in person too, but we're much more willing to engage in a back and forth dialogue if we have that human connection in person. So we just have to cultivate good digital literacy, emotional intelligence. And doing that can be really challenging, right? Because we live in a fear-based culture that doesn't reward vulnerability. We see a lot of like public accountability processes going really wrong, right? Like you need to, create a Twitter thread apologizing and, this is all the things that we think you did wrong. And if you try to defend yourself, then uh you're just like covering for your behavior. And so being vulnerable is not often rewarded, and so we have a tendency to pull back virtually. We're more likely to be more cautious and pull away from each other. So creating healthy communities really goes against everything we're socialized to do, especially in working communities. A huge percentage of Drupal contribution is sponsored, right? Which means that a lot of us are doing Drupal at our jobs. And it's a lot harder to be vulnerable and show up in a reciprocal way at work, because work can be kind of scary, right? Like that's our livelihood. So what that means is we have to push back against that socialization and create those healthy communities that are good incubators for virtual accountability and virtual trust. All right. So what barriers do you see and experience in your communities? And I want you to kind of think about virtual communities. And they don't have to be Drupal or open source. It can be any virtual community. Maybe you're in a Discord channel. Maybe you are in like a virtual like faith-based space. Maybe like an online book club. Maybe you're in a leadership group. But you can also think about a local community if you don't have a virtual community example. So I just want to hear, like, what are some things that you all have witnessed or experienced in your own communities that you see as kind of a barrier to creating psychological safety? I'll give folks a couple minutes to do that. Experience levels, yeah. And that's a power dynamic. Experience levels are a power dynamic. So, that's something that I'll be vulnerable with you all on the webinar right now, set an example. Coming into Drupal, like I was pretty new to Drupal, right? And I was coming into the Drupal Association with folks who've been in Drupal since the beginning, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I have been very grateful and honored to be able to be in a position of leadership at the DA. And sometimes I had a little bit of like, well, I have less Drupal experience. Should I really be in a director level position? And like, that's a power dynamic, even though I have a higher position of power in the org. Maybe some of you all who have been in Drupal for 20 years, that's still a power dynamic, right? Because you're integrated in the community in a way that is further along than the way I'm integrated, right? So that's something that I had to really overcome when I joined Drupal. And thankfully, the Drupal community was very welcoming and never made me feel that way. So they were my own demons to wrestle, right? But that's a great example of power dynamics. Entitlement is a big one. We see this a lot in like succession planning, of folks not wanting to give away their babies and feeling like a sense of control. Disbelief and denial is an enormous barrier to psychological safety. Like that doesn't happen here. We don't have that problem. Like we're doing great. And if you can't acknowledge it, then you can't heal it, right? That's what I was saying on the last slide. That's a super big one. Passive aggression. This is really hard in virtual communities because a lot of it too is us projecting tone onto other people. And so sometimes we're not even sure, right? It's like, are you being passive aggressive? Am I reading it that way? And there's this plausible deniability for folks who are being passive aggressive to be like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Whereas that plausible deniability is a little bit more challenging in person because of things like body language. But also that like projection going into the self-doubt, like how we receive someone's words online really impacts how we react to them, and maybe how we receive them is a reflection of things that we are insecure about, and maybe it isn't what that person meant. And that can cause a real barrier. You're speaking different languages, sometimes emotional languages. Intent being difficult to discern, exactly. And then engagement, right? That's huge. Virtual engagement is so hard, especially with, the pandemic kind of taking that agency piece away from us, right? Where the only way we can really engage safely is virtually. And all of us being in different comfort levels of what is and isn't safe for us in person. And this is systemic too, right? Like our health organizations giving us mixed information. And so, coming out of 2022, there was a lot more in-person engagement this year. And the virtual engagement has really fallen off in a lot of spaces because folks don't want to be online anymore. And that's really hard. And again, like accountability, I can only send a message so many times, right? And if someone doesn't respond, they don't respond. And then fear of tech is a huge thing. I definitely, and it's not all unwarranted, right? Like technology, we're in a crossroads right now of tech for good versus tech for profit. And so the fear of technology part makes sense, but how do we build trust in this powerful environment that allows us to innovate and connect with people all over the world? And then, yes, discrimination, closed-mindedness, quick to judgment of things that folks don't understand, which is why I was so excited. In our word cloud, the number one word was curiosity, right? Curiosity is antithetical to fear and closed-mindedness and judgment. So that's amazing. And so sometimes discrimination can be overt or it can be latent, meaning on purpose or not. But the impact of that is the same regardless of intention, right? Knowledge gaps, going back to the experience conversation, value of contribution. Yeah, so are we all contributing to the things that are important? Or are we, doing maybe a task that's not as important to moving something forward so that we feel like we've contributed or that we're involved? But that doesn't really move us toward a shared or common goal, right? And so that's why the knowledge gaps have to be filled so that folks know how to plug in and contribute. Disrespect and devaluing of people with different skills. Absolutely. I think the worst thing that the corporate professional development education model ever did was classify things as hard versus soft skills. As if soft skills are somehow less foundational, right? Like in many ways, and now the job market's seeing this, those are in many situations more important in a workplace, right? So I would love to see us reframe that in the next 10 years. And worried that you'll waste someone else's time. This one deeply resonates with me personally. I am always afraid of wasting other people's time. And I'm like hyper aware of other people's capacity, but then it prevents us from asking for help and it prevents us from bringing people in, right? And then we take on too much and then we burn out and then there's no one to help us. These are all really, really robust barriers. And thank you all so much for sharing them with me. But don't want to talk about barriers the whole time. But again, we have to, this disbelief denial piece, we have to talk about them to get through them, right? So I'm glad that we've acknowledged that, but let's talk about some strategies now. So what are strategies that we can use to maintain healthy communities? So these barriers are not impossible mountains, right? They are achievable, they're conquerable. So I'm going to go through some strategies and then we're going to share some collective strategies with each other too. So be demonstrative, right? So you have to really live it. And so I was talking about intent versus impact on the last slide. And that is true when we're talking about harm, right? So if something harmful happens, you don't want to center the intentions of the person who harmed somebody else. You want to center the impact of the harm, right? So even if you were well-meaning, if what you did was hurtful, that's what we have to focus on, right? But the demonstrative piece is where intentions are important. I don't think it's productive to completely abandon intention because intention is a reflection of values and our values are really important. So if we are always moving from the intention of building psychological safety and inclusion, then when we do make mistakes, we will be able to react to them in graceful ways. So intention is about us. So I do think intention is important. So if you have to live it, right? So model the behaviors you hope to see in other people, really live that in your everyday life, and explain the why. This is that transparency piece. Why you're choosing to navigate a situation the way that you are. And this doesn't necessarily mean revealing something personal or traumatic, but it can just be an expression of values. I'm coming to you about this conversation we had in a staff meeting the other day. This is how what you said resonated with me and it was hurtful. Here's why I feel that way. And I would love to connect with you about how to move forward, right? So just giving your why is really helpful. And then be specific about how you would like to be interacted with, otherwise known as boundaries, right? So setting your own boundaries and being respectful of your own boundaries is a great way to be demonstrative, right? And showing up for yourself is important, right? Like the oxygen mask metaphor, you have to put your mask on first before you put on other people's. And so, being intentional and having integrity to your boundaries will take you a long way. But on the other side of being demonstrative, also being teachable and accountable, right? So sometimes what we demonstrate might be the wrong choice, and that's okay, right? No one is the keeper of all knowledge. I was saying this earlier. I identify as a practitioner, not an expert. And we all have to be learning, and someone might be navigating something in a more healthy way than you, and we have to be open to that. And centering the truth of we're all capable of harm, but we're also all capable of healing, right? So keeping that central focus of reciprocity, right? We're all going to hurt each other at some point, but that doesn't mean that we're discardable. So centering restoration and understanding and accountability, not carcerality. So carcerality is a term in social justice work, specifically an abolitionist work. That means when we hold someone accountable, it's not with the intention of punishment. It's the intention of healing, creating understanding, and changing behavior, right? So if we're centering that in our accountability practices, it goes a long way in building those healthy communities. So how do we restore and repair the relationship? How do we understand each other's perspective? Can we find some common ground? And sometimes the common ground is, I don't want to interact with you anymore. And that is fine too, right? But not punishing each other is the core element of not being carceral. All right, so then prevent and address artificial harmony. So this is a big one. Sometimes, and someone actually said this on the barriers page of like, again, going back to that denial, that doesn't happen here. So we might fall into the trap of thinking we're in a healthy community if no one is arguing, right? So artificial harmony is something that can be hard to identify, especially if you are a facilitator of a space, because sometimes it feels successful that no one is in conflict, right? So, but healthy communities don't agree all the time, and they don't strive for perfection. They have open and hard conversations with each other that come from a place of trust, right? And not punishment. So here's some signs to look out for artificial harmony. Non-participation from marginalized community members. And this can look one of two ways. Either the space that you're facilitating has no marginalized community members in it at all. And marginality is dependent upon the country that you're living in, but there are some overarching systems of oppression that are present in every country in the whole world, which is class, right? Like financial stability, gender discrimination for anyone who is not a cisgender man, homophobia, racial and religious discrimination. So, being from a non-dominant religious group. So if you don't have anybody in your community that is from a marginalized background, and obviously a disability is a huge one too. In every country, those are like the main axes of intersectionality that we see folks marginalized within in every country. So maybe your community does have marginalized people, but they don't contribute, they don't talk, they show up, but they don't give any thought leadership, right? That's a sign of artificial harmony. They don't feel safe. to give their perspective. Maybe you have 1 to 2 leaders dominating a conversation, so it's the same 2 voices driving everything. And sometimes this is, I would actually say most of the time, this is in good faith, right? Like you have your high performers who are like, let's move it forward, and no one else is talking. And they feel frustrated. Your leaders feel frustrated because they're the only ones moving things forward. But then your non-participants feel frustrated because they don't feel safe to give their perspective. So that means that there is a systems issue, right? It's the incubator. It's not individuals, right? It's like what is happening in the environment that's causing this to happen, and how can we address that? And then lack of good faith dissent and collaboration. So good faith dissent is like, I totally hear where you're coming from. I think we should take a different approach because of XYZ, right? That's good faith dissent. Good faith dissent is not, that's a stupid idea, right? Like those are 2 different things. So how do you prevent and address artificial harmony? You implement good competency around global equity and global oppression. You do a base level knowledge, you create systems of learning and calling in culture, not calling out culture, and ensuring that you are outreaching and creating opportunities and resources for marginalized people to plug in. And then the last one I'll share with you is creating brave, not safe spaces. So why do I say brave? Like I said earlier, we're all capable of harm, which means that no space that you're ever in is guaranteed to be a safe space, right? And not in the like no safe spaces camp. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about building cultures and communities where we know and acknowledge that human beings aren't perfect and that we have the tools to repair each other when we do hurt each other. But you can't guarantee that harmful things won't happen, right? So how do you do that? How do you create brave spaces? With restorative codes of conduct, which Drupal has, and the new one is incredible. I'm really excited for it. So that is a big one. And then, oh yeah, someone asked, what is calling in culture? Totally. I'll give you an example. So calling in culture is, say someone says something misogynistic in a meeting, right? So someone says something that's like really disrespectful of women. Rather than interrupting that person in the meeting and being like, what's wrong with you? Why do you hate women? And like tweeting about them, putting them on blast, right? People don't learn that way. So a calling in culture would be having your DEI person or your community person or the person whose role it is to build this psychological safety, calling that person in, saying like, hey, this thing you said in the meeting was really disrespectful of women. I wasn't sure if you knew that. I wanted to share that with you and what the impact has on women in our community. And I wanted to talk through some ways that we can like repair that and continue your learning, right? So calling in is more so like entrusting that person is capable of learning and giving them the space to do that rather than publicly punishing them, right? So people don't change their behavior from call out culture, and they don't change their values, right? So that was a great question. Thank you. And then checks and balances, right? Going back to creating brave spaces. So community accountability processes. So one person can't own it all, right? There has to be some circles of feedback, multiple people involved, and then continuously build on those foundations of trust so that we can assume good intentions of each other. We can't assume good intentions of each other out of the gate, right? Like that's not acknowledging power dynamics. And especially for marginalized people, we can't assume good intentions because a lot of the time, systemic level harm is baked into whatever spaces we're moving into, right? But if we build a foundation of trust, then we can assume good intentions when we do make mistakes so that we can learn and grow together. So that was a lot of information. Would love to hear from you all. What strategies do you use in your online communities to build safety? Because again, I'm a practitioner, and those are my strategies, but I don't know everything. And there's lots of amazing community people on this webinar today. So would love for you all to do a little knowledge share with each other of what are some strategies that you use to build safety in your communities. I'm trying very hard not to slurp and gulp on the webinar. And they can be some of the same ones that I mentioned. That's perfectly fine too. That's actually exciting because then you can kind of see where people are already implementing these things. Yeah, awesome. Open door policy. And open door policies are really effective when you have created that culture of trust, right? So if you have an open door policy but haven't laid the foundation, people might not ever walk through your door, right? So I think an open door policy is great if you have built that trust with each other. Respect and communication, yeah, like always being communicative, having respect for each other's perspectives. Creation and consistent messaging. Yes, consistent messaging is huge because then everybody knows what the expectations are. Drupal does this really well, right? Like we all have read the code of conduct. The code of conduct is at every Drupal event. And we know what the expectations are, right? And that is a huge thing in building psychological safety, is having that groundwork laid already. Yeah, confidentiality statements are huge in building trust. So if someone comes to me individually and says, hey, I want to talk to you, then I will usually ask a question around confidentiality. I'm like, is this information that you want me to share in a solution, or is this just a processing conversation between you and me? And that goes back to boundary setting, right? So that's a great one. Owning mistakes. Yeah, I think it's really powerful to own mistakes and say, I messed up. But again, like if you're not in an environment where you feel safe to own mistakes, that can be really hard to do, especially if it's disproportionate. Like if it's certain people are owning their mistakes and other people aren't, that can kind of erode trust for sure. But being demonstrative and setting that example of owning it when you fumble, like it's a great way to build safety with each other. Sharing knowledge. Yeah, absolutely. So giving each other different tools and resources. This is awesome. Thank you all. So I do want to be respectful of our time so we can get to the questions portion if you have any, but encourage discussions with everyone's opinions, especially ones contrary to mine. And I think that is an incredible strategy to building safety. So the way that we respond to opinions that are different from ours is a great way to build trust and vulnerability. And like being open and curious to new ways of thinking is great. As long as they're not rooted in oppression, right? Like that's a big thing, right? Like we're having difference of opinion is not applicable to like discrimination and oppression, right? But like maybe we want to approach our code of conduct in a different way. Maybe we want to facilitate in a different way. And maybe that's not what I think, but maybe their way is better. And then yes, being intentionally inclusive. So laying that foundation, not just saying we're inclusive, but demonstrating. Awesome. Thank you all. All right. So I have a Q&A slide here, but I am going to actually turn it off so that you all can use the Zoom function. So we'll do that questions portion in a second, but really quickly, I just wanted to show you that I have citations and further readings in the slide deck. So if you want to scroll to the end, you can click through any of these readings and be able to continue to build your knowledge on this. And then I will reshare my screen for a closeout activity after the Q&A section.
Thanks, Vaughn. You did answer a few questions there throughout, so I appreciate that. And I did have one quick question, and then maybe we can give some time for others. We've got about 5 minutes.
Sure.
One question I had was just, do you have any good examples or places you can point people to for healthy examples of like how to engage in like healthy argument and conflicts? Like I think, like you mentioned, I think a lot of people treat conflict or argument as like a negative thing, but I think if we can embrace it a little bit more, but I'm wondering, like, are there recommendations or different ways we can do that that you know of?
Absolutely. So I think that what I would say is I am certainly not the like inaugural scholar of building psychological safety. And a lot of this school of thought is actually built out of Black and Indigenous women and trans and non-binary people. So I think those are really good communities to pull examples from. Some of the readings that I have in the PowerPoint slide, I think are really helpful in this restorative conflict resolution practice, and they have really great examples. Some specific ones I'll call out is We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. And so they wrote that book to talk about transformative justice. What does that mean? So what does calling people in really mean? How do we do it? And they give a lot of amazing examples in that book. Another one is Conflict is Not Abuse. Really, really helpful structuring framework around conflict. So conflict is actually a demonstration of trust. So if someone is coming to you and is taking the time to say to you, hey, that hurt me, they trust you to receive that information. And so a good example I give is like for trans folks, like if we're misgendered, if I correct you, that means that I trust you enough to fix it and I care enough about our relationship to tell you that. If you're not somebody that I trust or care to build a relationship with, I just simply won't correct you, right? And now, obviously, these themes aren't universal. Nothing ever is. So sometimes people like to cause conflict just to cause conflict, but we can identify that too. But conflict is not abuse is really helpful in figuring out, like, when you're engaging in healthy dialogue, like, how do you come to the table and speak each other's language? So I think those two books are great resources, but all of the links in the slide deck are really great for providing those examples.
Great. Well, you gave everybody a lot to think about and to look into afterwards. So really appreciate it. It was very informative. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Vaughn. Thanks very much for taking the time right before the holidays to present this webinar. I know you've given it in other venues, but I feel like the more places you give it, the better the community is. Thanks again for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And I know we're bumping up against time, so I want to give just a couple of resources in case people want to continue to talk to me about this, if maybe they can't right now and we're running out of time. So I wanted to share my screen and do our closeout activity. So some of you already filled this out, which is awesome. So 1 to 2 words to describe how you're leaving the presentation. So what energy am I leaving you with? And a lot of these words are super exciting to me. So encouraged, interested, thoughtful, ready to practice. I love that. It's a practice, right? Not feeling alone. And that is amazing because communities are about being connected to each other. So thank you all for doing that. Excuse me. Informed, validation. Oh, that makes me so happy. Like, feeling validated is so important to build trust and to build like self-efficacy and practicing accountability. So amazing. Thank you all. And then those are those further readings, like I said. And then I have my Drupal Association contact information here at the bottom. And so my Drupal.org, my LinkedIn, and also my email, if you would like to connect and talk about this further. And then also, I do this professionally outside of Drupal all the time. I have lots of anti-oppression workshops that I can facilitate, as well as like custom modules. And so if you would like to check that out, you can feel free to visit my website. And thank you all so much for giving me your time today. I really, really appreciate it. And always happy to connect after a workshop to talk more if you like.
Excellent. Thanks, Vaughn.
Thank you, Vaughn.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye.
There's a Q&A.